All right, so my topic today is not lost in transcription and translation. I suppose it's kind of a area where research is really just emerging. So really happy that we have colleagues here that we are discussing this particular topic. So for my talk today, I know that I've got probably around 45 minutes. Therefore, I think I'm going to quickly cover a few things. First of all, I want to talk about wiretaps, or basically communication interceptions in criminal investigation. And then I'll move on to talk about how wiretaps are used in criminal prosecution, both in monolingual and in my case, it's English recordings, as well as in bilingual or multilingual situations. And of course, what are the issues and where from here? Okay, so that's roughly what I'm going to cover today. Okay, now, if I ask practitioners, particularly in the audience or colleagues here, if you look at the picture, have you been there? Have you done that? I suppose most of you or a lot of you have been there and done that. By that, I mean police interpreting, particularly police interviews. You've been in this situation to facilitate communication between a police investigator, a police officer, and a person being interviewed. What about this? By that, I mean lawful covert recordings. Have you been engaged to provide services for the law enforcement, for them to be able to use the telecommunications that they intercept, or for them to be able to use the surveillance recordings that they obtained? Lawful covert recordings, and covert for students here, it means secret recordings. They are two macro types, like I mentioned before. One is in terms of communications. The other type is surveillance, or in layman's term, you go and then bug someone's house or someone's car, etc., etc. In terms of telecommunications, we are looking at two, again, macro types. One is live intercept. For example, your phone communications goes without saying, or these days, very popular, voice over internet protocol, or in short, VoIP. You and I these days, we use a lot. What do we mean by that? Your Line, your WhatsApp, your Viber, your all these communication, social media communication tools. These are the voice VoIP in that sense, and police can go and then intercept them. The other macro type under telecommunication is stored ones. In other words, again, I mean, of course, under lawful circumstances, police can go and then retrieve your voice or text messages for the purpose of investigation of crimes. In terms of surveillance, or in layman's term, like we say, you go and then bug someone's car or someone's house, etc., etc. Sometimes what you get is your audio recordings. Other times you might get audio visual. In other words, the secret devices planted at the venue, it might come with video, right? So the material that you receive might be audio or audio visual. Right, so when we talk about these lawful wiretaps or intercepts, whichever way you say it, we want to look at how the role they play in the overall criminal justice system. And before I start that, perhaps just very quickly, anecdotally, these secret recordings, if you look at the purpose that law enforcement normally go about it, anecdotally, they are mostly used in, illicit drugs related cases, money laundering, and human trafficking. These are the kind of the areas where you see mostly such operations taking place. And I'm sharing on the screen with you some US stats. And I'm very sorry, these stats are a little bit dated. It's from 2010, but I'm hoping that it gives you an idea where things are going. So back then, you can see that over 90% of wiretaps are on mobile communications. So you see, I mean, we all know that these days very few people use landlines. Therefore, it's very high proportion that wiretaps are actually on mobile phones. Over 80% of these wiretaps supports narcotics investigations. So again, you see the direction, and over 20% are classified as incriminating. Therefore, overall, you will say that these wiretaps or intercepts are actually useful. Sharing with you some Australian stats, and these are from our Attorney General's department, only from last financial year. When you go and then tap someone's phone or you bug someone's house, you can't just go and then do it. Of course, you've got to go and then obtain approval from the court. Therefore, in the Australian case, you need to be guided by the Surveillance Devices Act. So from our Attorney General's department, we are looking at, for the last financial year, almost 700 surveillance devices warrants issued in order for law enforcement to be able to go and then, intercept people's phones or bug someone's house or cars. And out of them, 75 arrests were made, 87 prosecutions, and 55 convictions. So overall, I'm just pointing to the fact that these operations, they do come to results, and they are, in a sense, quite useful in terms of legal and lawful law enforcement operations. Now, when you obtain lawful wiretaps, normally we are looking at two main purposes. On the one hand, sometimes it is to fulfill investigative purpose. Other times they serve forensic purposes. So I'll say a few words about it. In terms of investigation, we are looking at investigation of suspected criminal matter before it goes to trial, when detectives or investigators attempt to uncover the facts surrounding an alleged crime. So say, for example, in the telephone intercepts, they will be able to find out when persons of interest, when they will be meeting, where they will be meeting, or what they are going to do. So this sort of information, of course, is very useful. In terms of forensic purposes, we are referring to audio recordings being used or played in court as evidence themselves, as evidence of the crime. And you can imagine that in these situations, when you play the audio speakers in the audio, you might hear them making confessions or admissions that they would normally not make openly. So again, it's very useful. Now, a few words about prosecution of crimes. If we think about the evidence that we see used in court, one type, I think we are all very used to it, which is witness evidence. By that, we mean witnesses going to court. They tell the court what happened. And I'm sure colleagues in the audience will be very used to, going to court and interpret for witnesses or suspects, so on and so forth. So you are not foreign to this idea. The next type of evidence is so-called forensic evidence. They are normally presented as exhibits. For example, your weapons or documents, your love letters, or your threatening notes, so on and so forth, or fingerprints, DNAs, these are what we are more used to. And lastly, forensic speech evidence. And that is where your audio comes in. I have to say, though, forensic speech evidence, comparing to all the other types of forensic evidence, it is the least researched one. So I am actually putting out a call here today that if we have researchers in the audience, please join us in putting more efforts in researching forensic speech evidence, because it does need a lot more in comparison to all the other more advanced branches of forensic science. All right, now, why am I talking about transcription and translation in this overall forensic context? If we look at these cover recordings that I've been talking about, a lot of times they are of poor quality. If we compare overt recordings as opposed to covert recordings, overt recordings, by that we mean everybody in the talk knows that it's been recorded. Therefore, turn-taking normally is very orderly. If you think about, say, a courtroom trial situation or even a police interpreting situation, everybody knows that they've been recorded. Therefore, turn-taking, very orderly. Everybody is reminded to speak up. If you speak too softly, well, you'll be reminded, Madam Interpreter, please speak up. Comparing to that, covert recordings or secret recordings, clearly it is not the participants' intention to be overheard. They don't know if they've been recorded, or they suspect they've been recorded, but not quite sure. Therefore, unmonitored talks, normally, what does it come with? It comes with messiness of the talk. People might talk, loudly, softly. You might have overlapped talks. You might have code switching. People might laugh. People might cry. All sorts of situations. It's very hard when you hear it on the recording and try to decipher what's been happening. So covert recordings containing incriminating material have high evidentiary value. I think you could all agree with me. They might include admissions of guilt, involvement, or knowledge of criminal activity. Oops. And we would, again, I hope you agree that few other forms of evidence can be as probative or as devastating. Why? Because a prosecutor simply let the defendant's words caught on tape speak for themselves. They don't have to say anything more. You hear people admitting whatever they do in the recording, most powerful. So when admitting these recordings as evidence, good audio quality, and if they are in English, very simple, straightforward, triers of fact, and by that we mean your jurors and your judges, listen to the recording and they can go about deciding guilt or otherwise. A good quality audio, it'll be something like this. And this is a mock one, but you get the gist.
Hey.
Hey, it's me.
You've come back?
No, I'm still down there at McDonald's.
Where are you now exactly?
At the big house.
You mean the big house in M?
All right, so this kind of it's a simulated telephone intercept, but my point is to show you that, okay, if it's good quality and it's in English, it's straightforward, it's being used as an exhibit, then the jurors or the judge will listen and then decide. Now, of course, the world is not so simple these days. In the recording, it might contain foreign languages. That's when your good selves come in. You might be engaged to decipher the foreign languages contained in the audio. Now I'm turning to the quality of the audio. When the audio is audio quality is poor, what do we have to do? Well, in the case of English, if the recording is completely in English, the law allows triers of fact, so by that we mean jurors and judges, to be assisted by a transcript. And the technical term is aide-memoire. So a transcript normally is produced by the police officer investigating the crime. In other words, they become some sort of an ad hoc expert by listening to the audio a number of times, and then they produce the transcript. If you ask a serious question whether police officers have had training in transcription, well, I think the answer is straightforward. No, no police officers would have training in that department. If it's foreign languages contained in the recording, and we know that your good selves will be engaged. If you look at that situation, when you are engaged, you, like the police officers, when you produce the outcome, the transcript or the translation of the audio, you actually become an ad hoc expert, just like the police officers, in the sense that most of us don't have transcription training. We become ad hoc expert by listening to the recording many times, that part. But then in terms of the translation part, you are a genuine expert. So it's kind of a mixture, if you like. Now, using covert recordings as evidence for forensic speech evidence, when you look at presenting such evidence in court, jury's ability to evaluate such evidence depends on two factors. The first one, very importantly, is of course the audibility of the recording. Whether the listener can hear clearly what's on the recording, that's important. It goes without saying. It is not enough that you can hear it, but also intelligibility is important as well. If the listener can't understand what's been said. So therefore, if it's a recording in foreign language, even if it's very clear, it is not intelligible. That's where you are engaged. Okay, now, when the audio is not so clear, it is indistinct. This is when transcripts become very, very useful. I might give you an example here for us to kind of sense the difference between hearing something and being aided by a transcript. A very short video, audio here. Okay.
Shadow Hunter, alias Brett Peter Cowan, the main suspect in a disappearance of Daniel Moore from the witness in Queensland, 7 December 2003.
What do people think? And of course, I understand that that is very heavy, very thick Australian accent, very broad Australian accent. Bit hard to understand, right?
Shadow Hunter, alias Brett Peter Cowan, the main suspect in a disappearance of Daniel Moore from the witness in Queensland, 7 December 2003.
Yeah, comparing to the previous example, of course, it's kind of muffled and also not very clear to understand. What if, this is a real example, if I show you the transcript per se, and then hear that again.
Shadow Hunter, alias Brett Peter Cowan, the main suspect in a disappearance of Daniel Moore from the witness in Queensland, 7 December 2003.
What do you think? Having a transcript, I hope you and I all agree that this is very helpful. I mean, regardless of how accurate, that's another thing that we can discuss. But having a transcript, it is very, very useful. And of course, we said that when the audio contains other languages, you guys will then be engaged. And one thing important we have to keep in mind, when the audio contains foreign languages that the jury doesn't understand, then in addition to the audio itself, your translation also is going to be admitted as evidence. So that's very important for us to understand. And translator then becomes expert witness when you are subpoenaed. Okay, so that we have to, it's used to Australian accent. Thank you. All right, now, so what are the issues? We come to the very important point here. Right, so if the transcript is produced by the police officers themselves, and remember, I'm talking about the audio completely in English, in Australian and also in the States. In these situations, police officers producing transcripts for covert recordings, we ask the legitimate question whether these police officers have training in producing transcripts. I'm not having a go with police officers. I mean, they do great jobs here and also in the States, but we ask the legitimate question. A lot of times, simply because they are the investigators themselves, they are involved, they are invested in the case. Therefore, they can be regarded as involved transcriber. When you have a certain view of a certain case, the way you transcribe, the way you hear might be different from the next person who knows less about the case or who is more neutral. That's what I'm getting at. When your audio contains other languages, I ask exactly the same question because interpreters and translators are engaged to produce the final English translation of these audio recordings. We ask the same question. T&I, interpreters and translators, most of us don't have training in terms of producing transcripts. So are we ready for that? That's one question. The next question is, do we also become involved transcriber in the sense that normally when you undertake your transcription work in these situations, you will be working closely with law enforcement. They will be briefing you. They will be telling you what they think the case is about and the direction of the case. Therefore, unknowingly, we might also become involved transcribers. And I am posting the question for us to reflect on the consistency, the accuracy, and the neutrality of the transcripts produced either in the English situation or in the foreign language situations produced by us. So these are the issues that we have to consider, whether the transcript produced are consistent, accurate, and neutral. And obviously, in reality, they are not. Now, before I talk more about transcripts and how T&I practitioners produce them, I want to talk about pumps. You might think, Miranda, are you out of your mind? No, I'm not. But please bear with me. All right, I'm showing you some pumps on the screen. You will know that for a water pump, for example, that you see on the screen, when it's empty, kind of like that, if you don't prime the pump and you start the pump, it's no good. Why? Because the blades in the pump will be turning without being warmed up. A better way of pumping the liquid using a pump is to prime the pump so that in this void, it is filled with the liquid at the beginning, and then you will then be able to pump out the liquid or the fluid smoothly without hurting the pump. Okay, now I've given you the idea of priming or preparing a pump, right? And I need you to bear in mind this idea of priming meaning that prepare for something. The next thing I'm going to show you is a little clip Some of you might know this person. Peter Kay is a British comedian, and I want to show you something that is very relevant to what we are talking about today here.
Hey Australia, this is it.
Oh,
Tickets are
really...
now on sale for our High and Alive World Tour, hitting the road in
okay.
You're all about karaoke.
All right, so apologies for the commercial. That's not what I wanted to show you, but what I wanted to show you is here.
Apparently, according to Michael, your burgers are the best.
He's referring to Michael Jackson.
He must have had one of them burger bands. You know they have at fun fairs. Doing steak Canadians and hot dogs. Speaking of hot dogs.
Celine Dion.
I believe the hot dogs go on.
Okay. My point is that I'm coming to my point. Once you are primed, you hear from Michael Jackson, your burgers are the best. Or from Celine Dion, I believe the hot dogs go on. You do not hear, your burdens I will bear. Or from Celine Dion, she was actually singing, I believe the heart does go on, right? So my point is that once when you are primed, you can't unhear it. And of course, I'm bringing it to the importance of accurate transcript. This mishearing phenomena, it's people call it Mandergreen. It comes from an American writer, Sylvia Wright, recounting her childhood memory. Her mom, I think, sang her some, or her mom was reciting some Scottish ballads of some sort. The original went by Laid Him on the Green, but Sylvia Wright, being a small child, heard it as Lady Mandergreen, right? So this phenomena of mishearing is called Mandergreen, right? Of course, my main point here for showing you this is, importantly, we have to understand that triers of fact, your judges, your jurors, may be primed in the court when they are presented with unreliable transcripts. Very important to understand. And interpreters and translators, we from time to time are engaged to produce translation of those recordings. So when we undertake work like that, we may be primed behind closed doors when we work with law enforcement, and unreliable translations then later become evidence. So the consequences are high. Okay, so that's my very important message to share here. I want to say a few words about misconceptions about transcription. People say that, oh, it's easy. Yeah? It's simply a matter of writing down what you hear, like a dictation in a classroom, making the product essentially a copy of the audio, only in a different medium. But of course, in reality, if the recording quality is poor, like if you go and embark people's house, you know, many people talk at the same time, people laugh, people cry, all sorts of things. Recording quality is poor, then how do you go about doing your transcript? You have overlap talks, you have coded language, you have code switching. Not to mention when we talk, you know, the voice, the pitch, the volume, the tempo, etc., etc. Extra linguistic factors, your body language, facial expression, gestures, your eye contact, and your physical proximity. as well as your social linguistic factors, where the person comes from, ethnicity, your accent, your gender, your social class, so on and so forth. We all know that these all contribute to making meanings in what we say. So in the recording, you hear all these or you see all these, that's one thing. How do you represent them in a written form? That is the question. Therefore, when people say that transcription is easy when audio quality is good, or people say that a transcript is a true representation of the audio, what do people think after all that? True? Not true? No, it's not true. When even when audio quality is good, it's difficult. Yeah, and transcript is a true representation of the audio. Well, I'll give you a very quick example here. If I ask you to have a look at a transcript like this, and I'm hoping you tell me.
What I want to show you, I'll play the recording, and this one is an approximate one that's not necessarily interested in all of those particular details, but that is looking more for direct meaning.
So, yeah, and I suppose while in my last few years of teaching, I suppose I picked up some of those issues regarding boys' education because of the way I tended to focus in the classroom, and I tried to really be inclusive and probably to address whichever group of students didn't seem to be engaged. It wasn't as much of an issue for me as it wasn't as obvious an issue as it had become afterwards, standing back at a bit of a distance from it.
So what do people think? Does this so-called transcript reflect the reality of the talk? Yes, approximate. It really is cleaned up. Thank you so much for the contribution. And if I show you yet another version.
And the second way is going to be what we call an approximate transcription.
So, yeah, and I suppose while in my last few years of teaching, I suppose I picked up some of those issues regarding boys' education because of the way I tended to focus in the classroom, and I tried to really be inclusive and probably to address whichever group of students didn't seem to be engaged. It wasn't as much of an issue for me as it wasn't as obvious an issue as it had become afterwards, standing back at a bit of a distance from it.
Okay, so for this second version, I think colleagues would agree with me that it comes with a few more nuances. Your false starts and then the ums and ahs are at least represented here. So my point to show you these two different versions is really that to make the point that transcripts can never be a full representation of spoken discourse, which comes with almost infinite number of nuances and layers of social interaction. It is much easier to represent what is being said, but not as easy to show how something is said. I'm hoping that you would agree. And now I'm coming to address the point of, transcription, it's easy, and straightforward. It is a time-consuming business. Obviously, the lower the quality of the audio, the more time it is needed to transcribe, goes without saying. But even for same language transcriptions, in other words, you hear English, you transcribe in English. For clear audios, these are the stats that I'm able to find in the literature for research purpose. Those one-on-one interviews, or if you imagine in a police interview situation, recording is really clear. even for you to transcribe that, it is 4 to 5 times the length of the audio. For difficult forensic recordings in English to English transcript, you are looking at 40 to 100 times that you have to spend. Now, in terms of translation, so by that, I mean your audio is in a foreign language, but then you need to produce the translation of what is being said in the audio. National Association of Judicial Interpreters, NAJIT, I think maybe in the audience, we've got members, recommends a 2-step process. In other words, you transcribe what is being said on tape first in foreign language, and then you translate it. Even for the transcription part, NAJIT is talking about 60 times of the time that you need to simply finish the transcription, and it's not included translation. So really, really time consuming. In the Australian experience, what I can share is that 5 minutes of recording in the forensic context, you need 2 hours to transcribe and translate. In other words, it's about 24 times. So in any case, if you look at all these stats, you know that transcription, it is really a time-consuming matter. Not to mention that you, at the end, if you need to produce translation from a foreign language into English, that's even more time and very costly. So transcription, it is a highly complex, meticulous, and onerous task, even for clear recordings, because you need to deal with messiness of speech in cover recordings, and particularly when the quality is poor, it is really, really challenging. Transcribing cover recordings is particularly challenging because, why? Because you do not have access to the ground truth. By that, we mean the accurate, the incontestable knowledge of what is really being said. You do not have access to that. Transcribers inevitably make selections. Transcription is never a neutral action. What you hear and what the next person hear might be slightly different or completely different. Transcription involves interpretation of the audio stimuli. It's never the transcript, but always a transcript. I think that kind of reminds us of translation. I'm sure your translation teachers would always tell you that, look, you know, translation, there are many, many ways to translate. It's never the translation. It's always a way of translating something. Imagine this quick example here. Pack a packet of gum in the car. That's the original. Imagine if you hear it as pack the gun in the car. Imagine the consequences. So different, isn't it? And human oral perception can easily be misled by incorrect suggestions. We've been through that with Celine Dion and Michael Jackson. I'll play the example later on if we have time. So the implication, I'm coming to the last couple of slides of my talk. So what are the implications? I want to separate them into forensic transcription in terms of English audio and forensic translation in terms of audio containing foreign languages where you guys would offer your service. So what are the implications? If you look at transcription in the monolingual English situations, when untrained police act as transcriber, they may be hindered by having contextual information that is potentially unreliable. In other words, we are talking about the information that have not yet been tested by the trial process. Again, I hasten to add that I'm not having a go with law enforcement. They do a fantastic job, but we pose these legitimate questions. In these situations, they give rise to potential inaccuracy in the transcripts that they produce. And now we all know about this priming effect. Triers of fact are unable to unsee them once when they are presented with an unreliable transcript. They cannot reset their perception to give equal consideration to alternative interpretation of the audio that they hear. Therefore, it may give extraordinary privilege for the police interpretation of indistinct covert recordings, and it might increase the risk of innocent people being convicted and the guilty set free. In the situation that we will be in other words, translating forensic audios into English, TNI practitioners, unlike a live interpreting assignment, this task is decontextualized. You don't know what people are talking about. You don't have the overall context. And you are unable to ask questions, as we all know. Unlike in a live interpreting situation, you've got speakers there. If something is not clear to you, you can always ask the question to clarify it. And priming is not a bad thing, I hasten to add here. It provides context. Therefore, we need to have, interpreters, we all know that before you go to interpret in a court case, what do we scream for? We scream for a case brief so that we understand the context in order to interpret well. So priming is not a bad thing. It provides context. The thing is that receive relevant and reliable contextual information. That is of utmost importance. In a managed process, without exposure to potential misleading information. These 3 points are really important. I'm just quickly sharing with you the Australian survey that was conducted by my good self last year, which was published. There were more than 350 interpreting and translating practitioners who participated in the survey. And very quickly, to share with you, they all expressed, a lot of them expressed 3 concerns. The first one is there is a lack of stated qualification. In other words, whether I'm an interpreter, whether I should be doing it, because at the end, it's translation I'm doing, so should I be doing it? Or whether should I be a translator because I only have certification from English into my other language. I don't have from other language into English. Therefore, should I be doing it? So there is a complete lack of stated qualification. There is a complete lack of work protocols as well. How law enforcement should brief you, debrief you, and whether they provide you with a uniform template, there was very little that they were provided. They don't receive any translation instructions either. How much detail should they put in their transcript? Whether they should translate more literally or more meaning-based, or how much translator notes they should put in, very little instruction. They cry for specialist training. Only 3% of them said that they received training. And of course, they say that remuneration was really, really not good. Why? Because you have to spend a lot of time doing your translation at the end, but then it is time consuming, but then remuneration is not commensurate to the time they spent. Therefore, this is my last slide. The Australian study reveals the mismatch between the competence required by forensic transcription and translation and the current practice. There is a need for specialist training on transcription and forensic translation. And from my study, there is a possibility that we might be able to prioritize some more high volume languages. We train them so that these practitioners might be able to mentor the languages of lower volume demand. And we really need to work with law enforcement to develop uniform protocols so that everybody is on the same page. And we also need to work with prosecution and courts to develop guidelines on transcription and translation. We need national specialist credentials in order to ensure that people who perform the task do have the training and also the national credential in order to undertake the task. So with that, I conclude my talk. I think I'm slightly over time, but hopefully I've given you some overall idea of this particular topic, and very happy to share with you my thoughts and answer questions.